Oh, hi there. Thanks so much for joining us. Why don't you tell us about your new game?
Oh, sure. First of all, it's an action game. It's inspired by NES classics like Ninja Gaiden. I guess something that's cool is you can go back to earlier stages in the game to collect power-ups that you missed with your newfound abilities.
Oh, so it's a Metroidvania. I love Metroidvanias.
No, it's just an action game.
Oh, don't worry. Hollow Knight is like my favorite game ever.
It's not a Metroidvania. It's just an action game. Please don't put that in your article.
Oh, don't worry. We've got you taken care of.
Remember Shovel Knight? When I think of indie darlings, Shovel Knight is very near to the top of that list. It's a fantastic game in its own right and a lot of fun to be sure, but I believe that a lot of the initial hype for it came not just from its original and goofy style, but its insistence on emulating the 8-bit gaming experience, complete with crunchy audio and mostly limited color palettes. What resulted was a memorable game with tight and precise controls that felt like a modern version of our favorite games from the past. This unique combination of nostalgia and originality was very welcome at the time, and the characters and story, while a bit goofy, remained fun throughout all of its campaigns. So it's no wonder that when Mechanical Head Games showed off Cyber Shadow, Yacht Club Games came in and decided to represent the title by publishing it, giving the game a nice little clout-based boost. With how much I enjoyed Shovel Knight, getting my hands on Cyber Shadow felt like a no-brainer. Yacht Club Games had earned my trust after all. Where Shovel Knight is a modern adaptation of games like Mega Man, Cyber Shadow is like a modern adaptation of games like Ninja Gaiden and Shadow of the Ninja. But much like Shovel Knight, Cyber Shadow puts a lot of effort into emulating the 8-bit era of gaming. Crunchy audio, limited color palettes, and a simple 2-button control scheme. And also much like Shovel Knight, these limitations don't hinder the game at all. In fact, if you're as ancient as I am with plenty of nostalgia to burn, the limitations only improve the experience. For me, there's something that's just so magical about well-crafted low-fidelity music and sounds of the 8-bit and 16-bit consoles of the past. I'm a big believer in the idea that strict limitations in the hands of a skilled individual will bring out more creativity than the ability to do whatever you want would. And it's really easy to hear the skill and creativity on display here. Cyber Shadow's soundtrack it's just fun. So many tracks that are just filled with energy that don't get old no matter how many times you end up listening to them because you jumped into the same spike pit 5 times over. Whoops. I usually have a really hard time paying attention to the music in a game, and when I do notice it, it's usually because it's very annoying. But Cyber Shadow's music was hard not to notice because of how enjoyable and fun it was most of the time, and how much it contributes to the quick pace of the gameplay. In general, though, I'm not very good at discussing music, but you can judge it for yourself. This video is going to be filled with tracks from the game, so I hope you enjoy. Starting off, Cyber Shadow's setting is a bit of an awkward one. Traditional ninjas and high technology coexist in the same space, meaning you'll be slicing through all variety of mechanical creatures as well as biological ones. The ninja clan that you're a part of was responsible for quietly dealing with rogue robots that became trouble for society, and that clan's master is the central piece of this story. She's an ascended member of the clan that has a special connection to a realm between life and death that is called the Ethos, which is a realm of essence, the basic energy that makes up all of life, or something like that. The master got sick for some reason, so her father, Dr. Wiley, a brilliant scientist, went a little overboard in attempting to cure her and save her from death, resulting in a cataclysmic explosion that wiped out, at the very least, the city. Your character Shadow and his essence and memories have been transferred into a mechanic humanoid robot unit following the explosion, and your task is to find and rescue the master from wherever she might be. Unfortunately, though, all the robots and creatures left in the city are not on your side, so you have no choice but to cut your way through. Honestly, there's a lot more to the story, but when it comes to games like this, I tend to only absorb it at a surface level. The story is fine and interesting enough to want to follow and finish, but I don't really care for it much beyond being a framing device for the gameplay. The setting is fun too. Having mechanical enemies on top of just other ninjas and bugs adds a lot of possibilities for different types of things to fight. But up next, and the most substantial part of this video, is going to be the gameplay. And I wanted to save it for last because I have the most to say about it, and this section is going to have the most spoilers, both for late game gameplay and level design and bosses. For games like this, I don't personally think that spoilers are all that important because the gameplay is what carries the experience, but you never know. So, spoiler warning. Overall, whether you end up loving or hating Cyber Shadow, I think depends a lot on your tolerance for difficulty and your tolerance for the game's adherence to 8-bit design ideas. Browsing through Steam's reviews, I'm finding that most people who are having trouble with this game are frustrated with the controls. For a game with 2 buttons, Cyber Shadow has a surprising number of abilities. Since the jump button is sacred and must not be trifled with, nearly everything that you can do is mapped to a combination of the attack button and directional movements. You have your basic attack and your basic jump. This is what you start the game with. And by the end of the game, you have a shuriken bound to up plus attack, a flame uppercut bound to down plus attack while grounded, a down stab, not unlike Link's, bound to down plus attack while airborne, a wall slide that sticks you to walls while you hold the direction against it, allowing wall jumps, the ability to parry bullets by pressing a direction button against them as they collide with you, a dash move that is initiated by double tapping left or right with a special attack that can be used with the attack button while dashing, a double jump, and finally, the ability to charge your attack and all of your special moves for a powered up version. It's worth noting that all of these special attacks will use your SP resource if you have any remaining. For some reason, I like to call this SPA instead, so that's what I'm going to be calling it throughout the rest of the video. But with the exception of the shuriken, each of them can be used without any SPA, but will lack other effects, depending on which attack it was. It probably doesn't take you long to realize that the attack button might be a little bit loaded. 4 completely different moves bound to the same button depending on the context of your button presses and the character's movement. This means that if you're prone to button mashing when you panic or just don't have the presence of mind or focus, or maybe even skill to be deliberate with your button presses, especially directional movements, you're probably going to have a bad time. While I do have a couple of minor issues with the attack and movement abilities in this game, it actually surprised me a bit to see so many people frustrated by the controls. Then again, my background is kind of in these games. I grew up on difficult platformers, and my favorite games this past year include brutally difficult Kaizo Mario ROM hacks, and some other game that has a lot of different abilities mapped to a single button, depending on context between where your character is and what button you're holding. But I can't exactly remember the name. Oh, yes, Super Smash Brothers. Right. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Cyber Shadow is the Ninja Gaiden of Super Smash Bros. Or anything dumb like that, but I suspect it's a large part of why Cyber Shadow's overloaded attack button felt so natural to me. I've got my down air, my forward aerial, my down tilt. It all feels very intuitive to me. The only things that might be questionable are the double tap to dash and the parry. Mechanical Head must have known that the double tap to dash was the worst mechanic in the entire universe, and were actually kind enough to include an option to change that to the R1 button, technically destroying the strict 2-button system, but in my opinion making the game way more fun and way more reliable to play. Nothing is more frustrating than trying to finesse your movement, only to accidentally engage whatever ability is bound to the game's double tap, especially when one of the game's abilities requires you to use that same directional button as a parry. I mean, come on. I compared the 1-button system to Smash, but I've seen other people compare the parry system to Street Fighter. To parry a bullet, all you need to do is hit the directional button as soon as the bullet collides with your character. Instead of getting hit, the bullet will turn into a teal-colored energy orb that you can then slash to send a projectile back at your enemies. The game doesn't explain the ability very well with its simple text boxes, but after a little bit of experimentation, it's not too difficult to figure out the rough timing of it and how it works. I didn't find the timing window to be too incredibly strict, but it was tight enough to give me trouble in more frenetic sections of the game. It also has this weird quirk to it where you can't parry anything when you're in your invincibility frames after getting hit by something else, which, if you aren't aware of this, you might feel like the parry system is inconsistent and you'll get punished for trying to parry things after you got hit by missing. So you just end up in this cycle of getting hit because you missed a parry, and then getting hit because you're not expecting to miss these next parries because of your invincibility frames. It can feel a little rough if you don't know or respect that mechanic. As somebody who's not a Street Fighter player, I did find the parry system to be somewhat awkward at first. There were way too many occasions where I would just be going about my business and would accidentally parry a projectile that probably should have otherwise hit me because of my recklessness. Because of the very brief stop time effect of parrying a projectile, it can feel really disorienting when you do it on accident. In spite of that though, I found parrying to be a very fun and very welcome mechanic once I got used to it. It wasn't so free that I could parry the universe and become invulnerable, nor was it so tight that I would never want to do it. For me at least, it was right in that Goldilocks zone of the perfect amount of risk for the perfect amount of reward. It's a really fun mechanic. So for the two things that I had enough issues to write a paragraph or two about, they were both able to be overcome through an option in the menus or just getting used to it. Sounds like a win to me. But how does it feel to use those moves? Oh man. Earning, then learning to master these moves shifted this game from a solid to a big tasty treat. It's clear to me that a lot of thought was put into the final moveset of the character. Each different move covers one of Shadow's weaknesses. Shuriken takes out enemies from afar and gives you a safe landing zone. The Fire gives you a nice upward wave of projectiles either to spam enemies with or just use to reach otherwise unreachable targets. And the Dash? Oh, the Dash. You start the game with nothing but a jump and an attack. The first movement ability you gain is your downward stab at about a quarter of the way through the game, but that doesn't even really count because it barely extends your jump and imposes a lot of landing lag if you don't hit an enemy with it and you're locked into the animation until you either hit the ground, hit an enemy, or die. I mean, it's useful, but by itself, it's a relatively weak tool. It's not until about halfway through the game when you're starving for speed and getting sick of trundling along at a snail's pace toward your next objective that you finally get the ability to dash. And it completely recontextualizes the way you look at moving through this game. There are three things that you need to understand about the dash and its attack. Number one, the dash attack will use SPA to empower it, but destroying an enemy or object during the empowered attack will guarantee SPA refills. Number two, if you use the empowered dash attack, you will automatically initiate the dash again after the attack completes, even in midair. And number three, if a dash attack hits an enemy or an object and you have the double jump unlocked, your double jump will be reset. If you're wondering what all that means, then let me translate for you. Dash attack go brrrr. Once you master the use and timing of the empowered dash attack, it's hard to resist using it for every possible scenario. Once you get the double jump, the ground almost becomes optional as you fling your way through levels with reckless abandon and... Okay, so the game asks for a little bit of restraint, especially if you don't know what's coming up. Being a retro-inspired game, Cyber Shadow isn't exactly shy about putting instant death traps all over the place, so if you want the excitement of blasting through the levels at Mach speed, you need to accept death as an inevitability, because some of these quicker sequences are not that easy. Unfortunately though, you don't unlock this full moveset until about 75% of the way through the game, and at this point, the difficulty spikes a bit. More and more instant death traps litter the area, and the game really tests your mastery of all the abilities you've earned. I do think that the game is slightly on the harder side. I saw someone call Cyber Shadow medium hard, which feels like it fits pretty well. You're gonna die a lot, the levels and enemies and especially bosses will test your reflexes and knowledge, and you might suffer what feels like a cheap death or two or a dozen with a combination of some rough knockback and death pits. But there's almost never a checkpoint too far away. If you die, you respawn at the latest checkpoint, most of which, by the way, have customizable refill upgrades if you're willing to spend essence on them. You won't have enough essence to buy all of them, but if you only buy the refills you really need, then you'll never run out. If you die, just dust yourself off and try again with your newly gained knowledge of enemy placements and behaviors, and eventually, you'll make it through. What might be more unforgiving for some, though, is the game's bosses. Cyber Shadow's bosses are almost all incredibly well designed. Each attack is fully telegraphed and avoidable, and with the exception of one smelly water dragon, none of them are too annoying to fight or overstay their welcome. Most of the bosses wind up being pretty easy, but there are a few notable bosses where the difficulty spikes pretty hard. The water dragon I was just talking about is a major pain in the butt, asking you to bounce around platforms that keep getting destroyed that you have to create yourself while avoiding damage and trying to exploit the briefest of openings, ending up with what is probably the longest single boss fight in the game. Both fights against Subject Alpha are a significant challenge against a high health foe, where you'll be tempted to parry a lot and wind up dying a lot instead. And the final boss is a 3-stage gauntlet that will test your endurance, your memory, and your skill as you avoid all kinds of garbage. I'm sure there's more, but these were the most notable for me. Even with those difficulty spikes though, I'm confident that most players would be able to conquer these challenges with a little bit of determination. For nearly every boss in the game, there's a save point right before it, so you can just keep throwing your face at that brick wall until you destroy it. As difficult as the game tries to be at times, it's interested enough in your success to let you try again very quickly, a trait that I find very important in more difficult games such as this. Cyber Shadow's bosses are definitely a high point of the game for me. They were much like a carrot on the stick for me as I tore my way through the levels, but as fun as they were, the meat of the gameplay was in working my way through the game's levels. A game like this lives and dies by two things working in concert: its level design and its movement mechanics. Good level design doesn't mean anything if the movement is too simple or too boring, and the best movement systems in the world can be completely swept under the rug if the game's levels aren't properly designed with it in mind. So assuming you weren't completely chased away by the control scheme or instant death pits, what you'll find is a game that is more than lovingly crafted to give you a feeling of freedom of movement in levels that offer both an easy way and a fun way to get through them a lot of the time. Here are two very specific examples. First, soon after acquiring the dash ability, you're met with this obstacle. Sure, you could easily just walk through the tunnel underneath the imposing instant death pit of spikes that stands between you and the next area, or you could just dash strike through the robot floating above it to save a few seconds. Which one seems more fun to you? Or, and perhaps one of the best examples in the game, and one that took me probably 20 minutes of dying before I finally nailed the sequence, is this spot in the final act of the game. Sure, you could swing your sword to activate this platform and slowly drift along towards success, or you could just... Cyber Shadow's levels are chock full of these minor skips that, if you have the resources and the skill, allow you to blow through them with reckless speed that will probably, definitely get you killed. But go ahead, die a million times, who cares? Games like this are all about having fun, and this game gives you the tools to stretch your abilities and really master them in a way that few games actually offer. As someone who spent about 7 hours to defeat Kamek at the end of Invictus, doing things the hard way but fast way is one of my favorite pastimes. While some people have an issue with the 2-button control scheme and others are offended by the NES-style instant death pits, I'm personally not bothered by them. But what does bother me about Cyber Shadow, and I think what really holds it back from being even better than it already is that it just takes way too long to unlock the truly skill-based movement abilities. I mentioned earlier that the first movement ability you unlock isn't even really a movement ability. I mean, it's powerful, but it's very niche compared to the others. And the dash is only finally unlocked at about halfway through the game, which is a very long time to wait to get a dash mechanic, by the way. And as great as that dash is, it's not really super special on its own. It's not until acquiring the double jump that the dash really begins to feel incredible. The way that the combination of the dash strike and double jump interact is incredibly simple, but has quickly cemented itself as one of my favorite methods of movement in all of gaming. For the most part, it's just pressing 2 buttons with strict timing and somewhat alternating patterns, but the feeling of pulling it off successfully rivals Ori and the Will-o'-the-Wisps' more complicated endgame movement systems, and I think that's a feat in and of itself. But until you do unlock that, you're stuck with pretty basic, pretty boring movement. Just run and swing. Just run, slash, that's it. Not a lot of complexity or room to really let skill shine through. I recognize that allowing insane movement like the endgame dash strike double jump to exist closer to the start of the game would completely change the way the levels would have had to be designed among many other things, but the lack of any interesting skips or deviations allowed by a more complex movement system really drags down the game's potential and makes the game feel kinda stale in the first half of a subsequent playthrough. As far as 8-bit inspired games go though, there's not much that I could expect in that department. I can't think of many 8-bit era games that have complex movement with high skill ceilings, or even very many that do what Cyber Shadow does at the end. That era of games was always more about the precision more than the style, and I guess if nothing else, Cyber Shadow nails that while giving you some spice to play with towards the end of the game. With the exception of a very unfun, flow-breaking bike section that's reminiscent of Battletoads, I don't have much negative to say about Cyber Shadow. It's a game that succeeds at what it sets out to do and feels incredibly good to play. In fact, in a move that's pretty uncharacteristic of me, I found myself booting up the game again and again in my spare time to try and speedrun it. It feels that good to play that I just want to keep going through it over and over and over again, and as far as I'm concerned, that's something special. For those who care about time to finish stats, it took me about 5.5 hours to finish Cyber Shadow on my first playthrough, while exploring as much as I was able to on my way through. 100% completion after the fact brought that up to about 6 or so hours. Any percent speedruns are sitting at just over an hour. Cyber Shadow isn't a big game, or a long game, but the amount of attention to detail and the nostalgic aesthetics and really fun movement system make it well worth the asking price to someone like me who appreciates everything this game has to offer. I know that traditionally, discussion about a game's genre is usually relegated to the front of a review instead of towards the back, but I'm not good at writing, so I didn't know where to fit this in, but it seems that there was a bit of confusion among the media concerning the game's genre label, as implied by the skit that I put at the beginning. For some reason, a lot of people believe Cyber Shadow to be a Metroidvania, but it's not. It's simply an action platformer with levels that happen to intersect and can be returned to at a later point to collect more optional power-ups. I know that sounds like a Metroidvania, but trust me, there's a difference. Cyber Shadow is always pushing you forward linearly to the next level. The levels just so happen to intersect one another, but instead of a jumbled connection of pathways, the levels are more like a string that crosses over itself at specific points, with a chapter select computer placed in many areas for quick access. With persistent movement-based powers that allow the character to backtrack into optional areas, it's easy to see where the confusion might have come from, if the developers and publishers themselves hadn't directly contradicted the claim. It's weird to think that the Metroidvania genre has become such a popular term for hack journalists to crap out a quick article for clicks, but here we are, I guess. My point is, if you're looking for a Metroidvania to play, this isn't your game. You might have fun with it anyway though, especially if you enjoy snappy platforming and fun movement mechanics. I expected a lot from Cyber Shadow since it has the Yacht Club Games label on it, and for me at least, it delivered in spades. Unfortunately, it seems that, according to the less than impressive number of Steam reviews at least, there was very little hype around this game's release, and a less than trivial number of people found it unplayable due to the limited control scheme or being just plain bad at video games. I mean, not to cross my video genres, but look at this post on the Steam forums.
Welcome to 2021. People are sick of knockback. If you resort to knockback instead of actual challenge, then you are lazy game maker.
Oh, well, okay, I guess all games with knockback are bad now. Huh, well, that's it. That's the video. Thanks for watching. Whoa, hey, whoa, before you leave, congratulations on getting this far into the video, and if you did, make sure you use the word ninjastic in your comment, as in, this video was pretty ninjastic. That way I know you made it all the way to the end of the video, and you have my eternal gratitude. Speaking of gratitude, thank you to DanielBR93 for being a channel member. The support means a lot, and I hope you all enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time.